session, we're going to talk about brands. They are going through a lot of transitions. Things can go wrong. They're obviously incredibly valuable assets. So we're going to touch on all of that in this panel right now. I'd love to begin by talking about a transition that each of you has gone through, and kind of key questions that's raised for you that you think would be relevant to the audience. And if we could start with you, Sheryl.
Yes, well, Mary Kay is a 50-year-old brand. We celebrated that anniversary last year. And to keep a 50-year-old brand young and relevant is a challenge, in particular in the direct selling industry, because our very best customers have been a part of the brand sometimes 20, 30, 40 years. So you really have to approach brand evolution with, I call it tender loving care, and really be sensitive to the culture and what people love about the Mary Kay brand.
What's one moment where you have been thinking about that transition and which way to go, do you think?
Well, a recent example has been a decision by the company to offer direct shipping as a option for the consultants. So if you think about a 50-year-old brand, typically face-to-face, person-to-person home delivery, for the company to then say it's important that we offer direct shipment, it was important to be sensitive that the independent beauty consultant knew we were not intervening in her relationship with the customer. We were by no means trying to cut her out of that personal equation. So to get that independent sales force comfortable with our need to update our service options actually took a lot of change management, and it was critical to assure them that face-to-face, person-to-person was still the core of our brand, but we had to offer more convenient options to help her be more successful in her business.
Got it. Interesting. Jeremy, would you like to go?
So NASDAQ's gone through an unbelievable business transformation, and the brand actually hasn't maintained pace with the evolution of the business. So we started electronic trading 40 years ago, and if you were to ask even sophisticated people that follow the company or business how much of NASDAQ's revenue comes from US equities trading, you would get answers of 70, 80%, and the reality is it's 7%. And so the company has evolved and diversified into providing more financial technology and intelligence to the capital markets through a whole bunch of different areas. And the brand needs to broaden to make sure we're representing that. And so we have to place emphasis on some of our different assets, and that's the evolution and the challenge ahead.
Got it. Esther.
So evolution and revolution is just so very specific to our industry, technology, mobility. If you think about it, mobility is kind of the disruptive technology of our day, and all of the discussions that have happened today are around that. So as a company, at the center of this ecosystem, what's been interesting is going from a phone company to really an innovation company. And I know that word innovation is used loosely, but it's not just about making a phone call, it's about actually carrying your life in the palm of your hand. We are now working with an ecosystem to bring new capabilities every day in terms of how you live your life. So it's tablets, but then it's watches, it's mobilizing the way you automate your house, your car, healthcare, education. And so a completely different environment that we're really in. So very, very big revolution and evolution going on with us.
And you've been very involved in launching Beats recently, haven't you?
Yes.
Which is interesting to me, partially because I'm writing about music streaming for next week, but also it's an example of a brand, of partnering with a very new brand, which is just a few months old at this point. How do you think about how to present that to the public?
So Beats is a really great example of how, as a brand, we're not just going to be about selling you devices. It's going to be about all sorts of services. And I would argue that today, the technology brands, in a lot of ways, are the lifestyle brands, because they're reshaping how we're living our lives. And offering Beats music is just one other way in which we are really living that role in people's lives. So that partnership, and then also continuing to offer it at a reasonable price for people, the combination of both the capability and how you price it is continuing to be important for us.
I guess another big picture question for me is we have the companies represented here. Are we actually wrong to think that brands are actually in charge of their own branding, and it's not that the consumers who actually hold more power? What's your take, and what are the kinds of discussions you're having on that point?
I think it's definitely a joint custody situation. So with that, you certainly have to respect that the consumer, your customers, they have the power of the pen via internet. You have to listen to them. But at the same time, if you're adding value in terms of what you're providing, and if you're making them feel special, I do think you can have very successful partnerships. And certainly, when you talk about great content, that is really coming from those authentic experiences that your customers and consumers have with your brand. So I actually enjoy this joint custody relationship.
It's a great line.
And even so, a lot of our business is more B2B than B2C. The reality is that I think at the end of the day, every business has a B2C component to it. And so as we've gone through this brand evolution, what we're focused on, what I like to call the 3 V's, which are critically important in this sort of arrangement, is your vision, your voice, and then the visibility. And so as we've been able to define our voice, we've seen enormous uptick in our social channels. So in the past 12 months, we've seen a 280% increase in Twitter followers, a 200% increase in LinkedIn connections, and I think that level of engagement and being authentic, as you said, in that engagement really helps.
What does it matter for a company, though, that isn't ultimately consumer-facing? What does a Twitter follower really matter to NASDAQ? Is a Twitter follower really going to trade?
So we have a responsibility to the retail investors to make sure the markets operate effectively. And not only do we run our own markets, but we run markets in 80 countries around the world on our technology. So that engagement and that awareness is critical, but also we're able to provide content to our core customer base in the C-suite and with traders and things like that. And as we've had topics or issues come up, we've been able to engage the trading community via Twitter.
Okay. I want to ask you about that, Esther, because I mean, from a consumer standpoint, customer service is obviously like a really important part of kind of a wireless company's brand and telephone company. How are you thinking about the role that the consumer has in shaping you?
First of all, I think that the consumer's always had a role. So we've always tried to do lots of research, understand what their needs are in order to build products. Especially as we're going to these new areas, we have to partner with them to understand what their needs are and where to go. But as it pertains to marketing, you're absolutely right. Consumers can have an opinion and it can be out there. The conversation is not within your control. And I don't think any marketer today believes that they can. It's about controlling that. I think those opinions are important. We learn a lot from them. But I do think what's important for us as a brand, and the things we do control, is how we be and do the brand, not just talk about the brand. It's not just about messaging, it's operationalizing the things that you think are important to deliver for customers, actually in everything you do. So I think that's part of how we actually make sure that the brand is what we want it to be.
Okay. At The Economist, we talk a lot about creative destruction, and we think about it a lot with technology and products. I'm wondering how we should think about it with customers. And so for a 50-year-old brand, I don't think that you can actually appeal to the older customers and really bring in younger customers. You can't be all things to all people. And so how does that apply to your transition?
That has been one of the greatest challenges, and it's actually inspired us to actually broaden our product offering. And as an example, in our color makeup, we introduced a brand new line called Mary Kay at Play. Different price points, packaging, different marketing story, but we still kind of brought it back to the DNA of Mary Kay. It's still about beauty, about confidence and being connected. And then we bridged the 2 generations, if you will, through some on-campus tours where we brought in the seasoned sales force. We brought it into our CSR. We talked about an initiative where we partner with Love is Respect, and that ties in with our fight against domestic violence. So we are bringing the audience together, but it's through adding actually brand new programs, because you're right, one size does not fit all.
Got it. Do either of you want to touch on that?
Well, I would just say we launched last week NASDAQ Private Market, and you talk about creative destruction. What this market allows companies to do is effectively stay private longer. So we understand that that's a need among private companies, and today, while you're seeing great growth in the IPO market, companies are emerging much later in their life cycle, and that's something that they were looking to provide liquidity and visibility opportunities to emerging private companies.
It's really interesting.
So was your can you repeat your question? It was about creative disruption and how that helps evolve brands.
But with customers. So like at what point you should kind of get rid of, be willing to let go of some of your customers in order to bring in new ones, just like you would let go of a profitable product in order to kind of usher in a new one and start that transition.
That's probably not our business model right now.
Right.
We want everybody.
Turning to another subject, I'd love to ask about crisis. And I'll start with you, Jeremy, if you don't mind. I mean,
have no experience with it.
Right. That's what they tell you to say, huh? Can you tell us a bit about both how NASDAQ thinks about it? I mean, there was obviously an issue with the Facebook IPO. There have been others. And then any kind of lessons learned that you think that can be applied across different brand categories?
It's a big topic, and as I mentioned, not only do we operate our own markets, but we operate critical infrastructure for earnings calls for over 10,000 companies. We run our technology in 80 markets over the world and operating exchanges. So we're constantly dealing with topics that come up in each of those areas. And I think one thing that we've learned through that is it's critical to know roles and responsibilities. We've developed teams, playbooks, et cetera, so everybody knows when something does happen, regardless of where it is in the world or what business it's in, everybody has a clearly defined role and responsibility. And so there's no real questions when something comes up. You're able to operationalize right away. I think personally, too, I think it's also critically important to understand the arc of an issue, and that an event can be the beginning, middle, or end of that arc. And it's important as an organization for you to understand how those issues may impact different constituencies, different businesses, and make sure you're engaging and contacting those. And so when we've been able to do that both through all the channels available, whether it's web, social, traditional communications, and frankly, even through some of the brand work that we're doing today.
Okay. Could I ask you, is there something, even if you hit it before it became a crisis, anything that you want?
A little bit on that line. I think CMOs are now needing to think about themselves as being the chief reputation officer, because the best time to prepare for a crisis is before it happens, in terms of how are you building trust and credibility every single day, and how you conduct business in the good times, so that when there is any type of a crisis, you have the credibility, you have the advocacy that allows you to handle it. So fortunately, I don't have an example to speak of, because we have done a lot of work in terms of getting in front of issues that could be problematic. But I think the message is really about the preparation, and I think too many companies don't prepare in advance, and then they're up against the wall.
I think one of the things that we do, our social media strategy has changed completely. So we have, very similar to what was discussed earlier, a war room. We have PR folks, marketing folks. There's also care folks. So depending on what the messages are that come in, there are different people that are actually addressing them. Sometimes
how was it handled before? How was it previously handled?
So I think that previously, so if you go way back when, it wasn't. And it was kind of the purview of the marketer, and then PR got involved, and then you realize that some of the issues kind of umbrellaed between PR and a question and an opportunity to address a customer issue. So social selling. So somebody was unhappy with a plan that they had. Well, we have this other plan. So there needs to be tremendous coordination between different aspects of our company in order to actually operate in this world where consumers are so vocal.
Well, just to add to that, I think it's a great point, is that there are some trends happening within the marketing world where you're seeing communications, even investor relations, and marketing and digital and all those things being folded under one roof. And there is enormous benefit in my mind to that. When you are in a crisis and you are in control of those assets, you are able to engage with clients, you are able to engage with retail customers, you are able to engage and own all of your digital properties and make sure that that message is consistent and you're addressing that feedback in real time.
How are you, and we have a panel on this later in the afternoon, so I don't want to dwell on it too much, but how are you thinking about content creation? A lot of media firms are very excited about getting advertising dollars from people who want to do native advertising. How do you think of it, and how should it be done well? Can I start with you?
I think from our vantage point, our best content really does come from the testimonials, the experience that real women have with our products. So while there is a lot of talk about, optimizing content, I don't think the principles of relevant messaging have really changed. What has changed, though, is the quantity, and we talked earlier in the panel about how you serve up that content, but I think the principles, at least from our vantage point, have not changed that much.
Okay.
I agree on the third-party front. I think that's mission critical, but at our organization, there's so much content moving through it, whether it's an economic research department or our corporate solutions area. There's so much content. It's about aggregating that content and finding the best channels and delivery mechanisms for that, and that's something that we're still working through as an organization, but from our perspective, it's providing valuable content to the customer base at a time where they can digest it and use it. And the more we do that, I think the better positioned we are in our thought leadership efforts and, frankly, from our business development efforts.
Yeah, I think the area of content is such an explosion in confusion, to be honest with you. And we're doing our own steps to get it organized and to strategically think about it. But we've got new areas of content kind of being built all the time. So, for example, in the youth area, an example is last year we launched something called Summer Break, which was a web series that took place only on Twitter. And characters lived on Twitter to actually supplement the actual content itself. We're doing things now against the millennials where there's going to be long-form content, so kind of almost mini movies, as well as featuring and celebrating great entrepreneurs that are actually driving the mobile economy with new apps and new services and that kind of thing. And these are ways to actually engage that audience in a very new way. And the distribution strategy around it is very different than, for example, the content that we develop to help people understand how to use a new device. We have content in the business arena because we have a significant business-to-business operation. And so what does content look like over there? Our creative agencies want to build content. Our media agencies have relationships with the media owners, and therefore there's content that can come in this way. There are new players that are always knocking on our door for content, so to build content for us. So what I would say is I think we are down a path that is much more robust, but it's still a world of what I would call filter failure. There's just so much. And we still need to make sense of it, and I think there's still a culling through, and the world is changing beneath our feet at the same time. So, this is the Wild West that continues to be the Wild West in a way.
I agree, and one of the things I'd add is that we are really laser focused on this from a usability perspective at NASDAQ, and so we bought Thomson Reuters IR, PR, multimedia businesses, and we've put it into our corporate solutions offering. And one of the things that we're really working on right now at NASDAQ is building a next-gen platform for you all, where that you're going to be able to have on your screen all your social feeds, all your news feeds, and even investor relations, buying and selling, stock movements, research reports, in one dashboard that you'll be able to look at. And the more integrated I think the C-suite and CMOs are and on the relevant information that they're looking at, I think the more opportunity will exist to be on message and connect with your customers.
Got it. A lot of thought is given to product design. How are you guys thinking about website design? Because often that's a lot, even more potential customers are coming into contact with that than they are with any kind of purposeful advertising or marketing beyond the website.
I think like a number of brands, we are starting mobile first now because of the usage and how much commerce is coming through mobile. But with that, I think the most important thing that we're doing is making sure that the design is responsive, and not just responsive, I'll say mechanically or technically, but responsive to how she wants to get information. So with our business model, we're both B2B and B2C. And what we are doing now is using our data to understand what kind of information she wants at a given type of day, at a given time in her business. Is she a new consultant? Is she experienced? And making sure that we can really design to something that she can basically do almost anything in 2 clicks while she's running the soccer practice, or maybe before she's about to go talk to 200 women.
Okay. So mobile first.
Mobile first.
Okay. Jeremy.
We're in the midst of a redesign as we speak, and from our perspective, this is fundamental to the brand issue I outlined earlier, which is we need to find a way for visitors to NASDAQ to be able to seamlessly navigate the portfolio of products and services that we offer, and I think it's fundamental to the brand. And so that's the huge initiative in front of us right now, is to allow that to happen and understand who and which customers are coming in and making sure they're receiving the content that's relevant to them.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of principles that are in operation as we think about web. One is, how does it reflect the brand? And the second is, people today want the most effortless experience. Right. But what's interesting is in terms of the brand, so one of the evolutions we made is the retail channel first, so I'll talk about web in a minute. And what we said is the retail store can't just be where you buy stuff. So we built a concept store on Michigan Avenue, and it was about the interaction, not the transaction. It was really organizing the store into lifestyle areas. So there was entertainment over here, and productivity over there, and fitness over here. We had even accessories that were designed by local designers and things like that being sold in the store. We learned a lot from that, and now we're looking at what are the principles to actually roll out against our entire retail footprint to be a more lifestyle brand. If I take that same thing now to the web, we predict that for ourselves, while today 80% of our interactions are live, so on the phone or in the store, by 2020, 80% of our interactions will be online. So when you think about designing web, it can't just be about, is it simple to use and does it have all the compartments? It now has to replace the relationship that people have in the store or on the phone. How do you actually, communicate generosity or helpfulness and things like that? That has to be built in besides just the right pieces being there.
And how do you think about having your physical presence be unique? A lot of times when I see stores, not just AT&T, but I think that a lot of companies have tried to Applefy, and it's an interpretation of what Apple has done so successfully. How can you really make your mark on that interaction?
Well, it's interesting that you should ask that question, because when people came into the store on Michigan Avenue, we asked everybody what their impression was and what was the one word that they would use. And it was very modern, very fresh, but they said warm. And I'm not sure that would ever be the word you'd use when you walk into an Apple store. And somebody actually did say, it's like the Apple store, only better. We were like, all right. Now, that's not every one of our stores across the country yet. Slowly but surely we will be evolving. But I think that's the important thing, is in this time of technology and technology stripping out the humanity, I think you also have to think about how do you bring some humanity back. And that's also in terms of mobile experiences and web experiences.
Okay. Let me ask you one last question, and then I'll open it up. You mentioned kind of revising your how you approach social media. I'm curious if there are really any innovative ways that we're seeing, either at your brand or if you look to others. It doesn't strike me that users of social media are particularly enthralled with the idea of being met by brands there. I don't think that it's necessarily a space where people want to feel marketed to. How are you trying to adjust to that reality of what consumers want?
I think certainly in our category, women want to feel beautiful, but more importantly, they want to feel special. And they want to feel more confident. So when we think about our voice in social media, it really comes back to those conversations and thinking about people in terms of how do we show them that we value them, how do we help them feel confident in their beauty and their abilities. And those are the posts and the messages that seem to resonate the most. So it really isn't, quote, about what we're selling, but it's really about that relationship.
Got it.
I think I agree, and I would just say that your voice is critical during this, and when you're engaging, you're not selling, but you are representing your brand, and things like transparency, engagement, and visibility are mission critical right there, and people will evaluate your brand and its authenticity in real time. And so I hear you. I think, though, that it's a critical part of the overall brand building effort.
Yeah, I think that it depends on what it is we're doing. So there are times when people actually want to know what a new deal is from AT&T via a tweet or whatever else, other social media mechanisms. But I would say that sometimes it's about galvanizing people around a thought or an idea. And the example I would use there is the effort we have around ending texting and driving. It's called It Can Wait. And we have broad-based advertising out there, but we use a tremendous amount of social media for celebrities to actually talk about, please take the pledge, people telling stories about their experiences and their personal situations, them encouraging their friends. So it really was an important aspect of actually building groundswell around something that people cared about.
That's a great point.
Got it. Well, let's open it up to questions. It's an interesting panel because we have very distinct industries, but I think can reach some broader truths too, but feel free to zero in on any one of the companies too if you'd like. We have a question here in the front. And the microphone's just coming to you right now.
Ed Lara, and I'm with the healthcare insurance industry. I'm really intrigued by that notion of creative destruction and the fact that brands are joint custody, as you said, Sheryl, between the marketers and their customers. What kind of framework do you all apply when you're thinking about the different audiences, especially when your brand still lives a certain way in the minds of your traditional core base? Right, an older cohort perhaps, but you want to attract the newer cohorts coming in. In the insurance industry, right, the Blue Cross Blue Shield name is probably stronger in the older group, but you're trying to attract the millennials as well. What framework do you apply, whether it's then younger versus older, B2B versus B2C, to make sure that the brand lives in a consistent way, despite the fact that the joint custody owners may have a different idea of what you should be to them?
Who'd like to start that one?
Well, I can say in our situation, a lot of times when we talk about generations and what either keeps them apart or brings them together, it really does come back to how do you make sure everyone feels valued. And in the case of Mary Kay, we found that while millennials might be a little bit threatening to a more seasoned Salesforce member, at the same time, they love their grandchildren, they love their nieces and nephews in college. So it really wasn't about generation. It was really about respect and finding those connection points where your mature brand lovers, and they are extremely valuable to your franchise, their values, their experience are actually things that millennials are hungering for. So I see our role as CMOs as really finding those connection points between the generations to bring them together.
From our point of view, and to build on the values concept, we went through an exhaustive internal and client research effort to understand what are the attributes that we want the brand to be associated with that are most important to our customers. And so when we do launch something like the NASDAQ Private Market, we were able to stay true to those attributes and values, but also provide a unique visual identity and some key messaging that we knew would be attractive to that emerging young CEO. And so I think having a grounding in those values and attributes with the brand is mission critical, and it allows you to do different things, but still stay consistent.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what was said here. I think that some of the discipline that we use is, we have an overarching brand vision and what I call framework. But underneath that, we have lots of businesses. We have the B2B side, we have small business, we have obviously the larger enterprise, we've got consumer mobility, we've got the video business. So there's lots of different business units as well. And we do focus on making sure that we have a very distinct value proposition for each of those that define it and sit underneath the overall brand. And then obviously there are segments within each of those. So I think there is a framework approach, but given that, there also have to be things where there's freedom in the framework. And things like a visual, kind of a design system, and we use sonic, we use tone of voice, we use visual, is a way to actually help galvanize things. We use even language assets that we use commonly. And I think some of those things we're going to be using more so in the future as we move forward. But, a very complex and a very, good question. Very complex.
We have time for one more question, and the lady who's right here in the third row.
Hi, I'm Jessica McDonald with Spark Fun Electronics, and you guys talked a lot about transparency, the human factor, authenticity in the social sphere. Do you think automation tools that schedule posts violate that, or are they still a tool that we can use to send out content that we have created in-house?
It's an interesting question, getting more into the technology. But.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some value to automation, and I think some things are somewhat timeless. Things around inspiration, things around success. And so if you know your audience and you know that there is a certain type of message that they will find useful, that they will be able to use in their business, then I think there is a role for automation. But at the same time, I've said to colleagues, there is no algorithm that can truly predict how a woman is going to feel at any moment in time. So I would never throw my money into that.
I haven't experienced that.
It's a great note to end on.
Yeah, right. I agree with Sheryl. That's the end.